Hi, I'm Drew Hutchison. You're tuned to Local Bias. We come to you from the studios of Greenfield Community Television at 393 Main Street in beautiful downtown Greenfield. And with me today is one of my local heroes, Glen Ayers. Glen, welcome to the program.
Nice to be here. Really good to be back on the show.
It's nice to have you on the show, but also if people listen to WMCB, Western Massachusetts Community Broadcasting at 107.9 LPFM Greenfield, they can hear the Enviro Show, which you produce.
Yes.
Out of Northampton, though.
Well, we actually do it over Zoom now.
So it's okay.
But really the kind of the anchor is at Valley Free Radio.
Right.
That's where we started we're in our 20th year.
And you've kept going, that's amazing.
And we've kept going. We've switched over to recording it through Zoom during the pandemic.
Right.
But we've continued to do that because it's convenient. Don't have to drive to Northampton every other week. And unfortunately for me, I am very picky and persnickety, and I spend like an entire day editing an hour show instead of just going in and recording live like we used to do. But I just want it to be better quality than a live show would be. So I do a lot of editing.
But that's a show that's generally about the environment.
It is.
And that is your background. You're an actual bona fide expert.
I have been working in the environmental field really since before I went to college, but since I graduated from college in 1979.
Wow, that's when I graduated from high school. I didn't know. I thought you were younger than me. Because you're so devilishly handsome.
Yes.
But anyway, let's move.
I've aged well.
You've aged well.
Like a fine wine.
Right. So you came on today because you wanted to talk about a few issues concerning the environment, surprisingly enough, including the property at the former Lunt Silvermiths, which there have been issues with remediation of all the heavy metals, or what is there? Well,
so Lunt is, an old industrial site. They went bankrupt, theoretically. They went through a process of evading responsibility. And that was done in conjunction with the city, with the two mayors prior. They evaded responsibility for the pollution that they caused. Pretty widespread contamination at that site, both heavy metals, because it was a silversmith, and also solvents, chlorinated solvents that were used for degreasing purposes and other things. And I believe there's probably forever chemicals there, PFAS chemicals, because those are related to metal treatment, finishing and that kind of stuff. But no testing has been done so far for any of the PFAS chemicals. We've been asking for that. But about a little over 2 years ago, the current mayor, who was on the city council, came to me and said, can you look at this? Can you look at these documents that I've been looking at? Something's not right here. And I looked at things, and immediately I realized she was right. She had a hunch. It was a gut feeling for Ginny that there was something fishy here, and it certainly was. And what the reality was that they found a lot of contamination there. They did a superficial cleanup, put in some parking lots and things and covered up the contamination, but they claimed that they were going to clean it up and make it safe, but they never did. And then they redeveloped the site and found some loopholes in the state law that they could use to avoid the responsibility and cleaning the site up to actually make it safe. In fact, when they opened up the addiction treatment facility there, afterwards they filled up the facility because there was a long waiting list for addiction treatment. And I'm very much in favor of that facility as a public health service, critical. But they filled up the facility, and then they did indoor air testing and found that the indoor air was very contaminated with solvent vapors seeping in from under the buildings. And it was so bad that they had to do what's called a 2-hour immediate response. In other words, they had to open up all the windows, they had to do more testing, and they had to keep some rooms off limits. And they only tested in the kind of facilities areas. They didn't test in any of the patients' rooms.
Are you kidding me?
Because they were occupied. So they tested it in the nurse's station and some other areas, some closets and things. But what they discovered was that the contamination was seeping in from the ground and volatilizing into the building. So they put in a passive system of pipes under the building to vent it out to the surface. But that system has not been tested to what I would consider to be a standard. They have done some additional testing at various times, which would be considered a grab sample. You just go in and take a sample. They do it over a 24-hour period, but they haven't done anything that I would consider to be scientific or consistent, or looking for the conditions during the worst possible times of year when the water table is very high. There's a fluctuating water table there. It varies by as much as 20 feet over the seasons, or from year to year. And so when the water table is very high, the solvents that are dissolved in the water would be much closer to the surface of the ground, much more likely to come into the building. In fact, there's a basement in one of the buildings there that floods regularly. And you can see there's evidence of silt coming in, so water infiltrates directly into the basement, and that would carry the solvents in with it. So the bottom line is the site was not properly cleaned up. I think at that point, everyone assumed that it had been before it was developed.
It had been said that it had been taken care of.
It was part of the plan. There was a preliminary study done that showed that it was going to cost about $1 million to do various things to make the site safe. That was never done. And then it was just kind of put to the side. And Ginny started looking into this when she was on the city council, because the previous mayor was trying to get the council to designate that property as surplus municipal property that the mayor could dispose of. It
and then
required
have responsibility for, basically, by disposing of it, or
well, then she could sell it. And so the developer, who has sunk a lot of money into rehabbing those buildings, along with a significant amount of state grant funding.
Okay.
So, a lot of money came in from the state.
Those come with a lot of strings attached. Normally you have to meet standards.
Normally you would have to clean up that site.
Right.
But they had an LSP, a licensed site professional, working for the developer, who figured out loopholes and ways to cut corners and avoid cleaning the site up. In fact, he proposed in 2020 that the cleanup be abandoned completely and that the site be put into a category called a limited use, so that no residential buildings would ever be allowed to be built there. No houses could be built there because they couldn't clean it up to that standard, but they could use it for industrial commercial purposes.
And it's not being used for industrial or
well,
commercial
that's
purposes.
what they're claiming. That's what they're claiming, this treatment facility where people can spend months at a time and workers are there every day. It's a residential overnight treatment facility. They call it residential treatment, but yet they use a loophole in a definition of what a residence is, and they got through this loophole. And to me, it's very sleazy.
Right.
I'll just say that. As a regulator, as a person who enforced regulations, I was a code enforcement officer for almost my entire public career. Mm-hmm. I started in 1980 working for the state of Pennsylvania, enforcing the solid and hazardous waste regulations. And I continued through that in Massachusetts here when I moved here in 91. I went to graduate school from working in Pennsylvania out in Colorado, but I was an environmental activist out in Colorado. I worked on highly technical, scientific kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And then I moved to Massachusetts and I got involved in public health because my training was in that kind of hazardous waste, solid waste, water quality, somewhat air quality, but I worked in the public health arena, and I became essentially the technical advisor to boards of health in Franklin County.
Right.
And that's, last time I was on the show, I was working at that job. I've since retired, which I highly recommend to anyone considering retirement. It's the best thing in the world. And I would say, furthermore, as soon as you possibly financially can retire, do it. Don't wait.
Really?
I believe that there's so much more to life than working.
I believe that.
And I want to be clear, I loved my job. Mm-hmm. And my job that I did working for the Regional Council of Governments as the regional health agent was a perfect fit for me.
Right.
It was a hard job to leave.
Right.
I was very, very competent, very good at it. And it took a lot of compassion. I was really, a lot of times I was a social worker, not trained that way, but supplying services to people that really needed it, desperate. situations. Anyway, I love that job, but I really have had a great time being retired.
Well, that's wonderful.
It's the best thing. And my wife, who I met while working at the FERCOG, also retired at the same time, even though she didn't have enough time, to get a pension and all that stuff. I do have, because I've been a state employee for so long, I do have a state pension. Mm-hmm. But I saved, when I was working, I saved more than half of the money that I made.
Oh my.
And squirreled it away into, deferred comp and all those different programs so that we're comfortable.
Nice.
In our retirement.
And the thing is, you're young enough to do anything you want.
But we also live very frugally. Mm-hmm. We don't have lavish lifestyles. We have a beautiful house in Greenfield, but it's very, it's very modest. It's very average. But if you come to our yard, you'll see that most of our time is spent, especially my wife, most of our time is spent in our yard. Mm-hmm. We've converted what was a drab, really overgrown, terrible, small lot into a paradise.
Oh, nice.
And it is, we've been on the garden tour several times. This summer we were on a national garden tour with the Garden Conservancy, and probably had 50 or more people come through. And
you have plants that favor the native pollinators, and
our yard is an oasis for pollinators.
Okay.
It is incredible.
Because I actually cultivate the weeds in my yard. I think they're beautiful. Yeah. They have their place.
We have plenty of weeds, but we also have plenty of intentional plants, and probably 25 different kinds of fruiting plants and trees and bushes, and it's sort of a permaculture haven. And we eat, a lot of meals. We eat, we walk outside in the morning, pick, and have our meals. It's it's ideal. But again, we like that kind of stuff. Really, I was attracted to my wife before I knew her, because I took a walk with another coworker and we walked by her yard, and I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And that was just the beginning. Mm-hmm. It has evolved over 10 years into a pretty amazing thing. But I digress quite a bit.
But it's lovely.
But the thing about Lunt, really getting back to that, is that there needs to be a full kind of accounting of how this process went so off the rails, because it did.
But who gets to do that? I mean, what's the method for that?
There is no method for that.
So
that's what we have been trying to do. When I got involved, when Ginny asked me to get involved, I started reading the hazardous waste regulations in Massachusetts. I could quote it has numbers and that kind of stuff, Code of Massachusetts regulations. But there was a section in there, Section 1400, that refers to public involvement plans. Mm-hmm. And by getting 10 citizens to sign a petition, that triggered, it was an automatic trigger that this site be designated as a public involvement plan site. And when I saw that regulation, and I had never read these regs before, but I've been working with regulations my whole career, and so I saw that and I said, bingo, that's what we do. And so within a few days, I had those people signed up. We submitted a petition to the mayor at that time, Weeda Gardner, and that site got designated as a public involvement plan site, with a whole list of requirements for how public needs to be involved in the ongoing efforts to clean the site up.
Okay.
And I can tell you that all we met was resistance from the previous administration. And that was when Ginny was on the city council, so she experienced that. It was just unbelievable resistance. But we organized and organized and organized. And eventually we got over 120 people to join that group, the PIP group, including almost all of the city council members. I think currently there's 9 members of the existing city council that are members of the public involvement plan group.
That's impressive.
So very political, that has political power. And as a result of that effort, the DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, conducted an audit of the cleanup process. Mm-hmm. And they issued a notice of noncompliance to the city. And this is almost 2 years ago now.
Okay.
A little over 2 years ago. And they issued a notice of noncompliance and said, this process has not complied with the law. And here's what you need to do. And so we've been working through that determination that the state made, and they did a great job of the audit. And the reason why they did the audit was because we formed the PIP group, the Public Involvement Plan group, and that showed them that there was political organizing happening here. DEP is an underfunded, under-resourced agency at the state level. They have had their budget slashed. They have half the people that used to work there. And it isn't just one administration, it's many administrations over many years have whittled that agency down to a skeleton. There was a talk a few years ago of actually closing the Western Regional Office, which covers about half of the state, and moving that into Worcester. So can you imagine how much work would be done in Berkshire County, people having to drive from Worcester?
Right.
But that didn't happen because of kind of a rebellion or pushback. And so the office is still open in Springfield, but it's very understaffed, very underfunded. And so it was pretty amazing to us that they actually did a very thorough audit. And they found numerous areas where this cleanup effort, had not complied with the law. And so they issued this audit document saying this is what you need to do. And now the final kind of report addressing the findings of the audit will be due in February, this coming February 2025.
Okay.
In my opinion, they should have had that report out a year ago or more.
Okay.
But again, there was a lot of delay that happened. And finally, I'll just say, if I was taught by my mother, if you can't say something nice about someone or about a situation, then don't say anything at all. So I'm going to say nice things here. And the nice thing is that finally the city, after more than 12 years of not having a licensed site professional working on cleaning up the site, which is required by law, but after 12 years, the city has finally hired a licensed site professional. So that's a really great, huge progress. We pushed for that with the previous administration, previous mayor, and we had letters to the editor and protests, and went to every city council meeting asking for that. At one point, she actually said that she would ask for some funding from the city council. The city council said, just ask, we'll give it. But that never happened. So finally, our new mayor, who was on the city council previously and pushed to have an LSP, has now hired a licensed site professional to oversee the cleanup of the site. It happens to be the same licensed site professional that our group, the PIP group, had hired.
Okay.
So one of the things that I did was I incorporated the PIP group, the Public Involvement Plan group, into what we call the Lunt Neighborhood Action Group, the LNAG. Okay. And I went through the process of getting a certificate from the Secretary of State that we incorporated as a nonprofit group.
Okay.
And then I've even gone further than that, and I've filed with the IRS for nonprofit status under Section 501c3. So we're a very legitimate organization. Right. We have a board of directors, bylaws, we have regular meetings and all that stuff. And this is to focus on cleaning this site up because the public deserves to have a toxic waste dump cleaned up,
right,
especially when it's surrounded by residences and businesses. It's in a very developed part of Greenfield on Federal Street.
And also all the employees that are there and all the people, the residents. I mean, there's the DTA also, so there's the Commonwealth would be involved because it's a state agency.
Exactly. So for me, in my background, I had grave concerns about the public health and safety, the worker safety there, and the residents who are going there who are already severely challenged by addiction.
Right.
I mean, if you don't understand, the world of addiction, you don't want to go into a facility that certainly challenges you by exposing you to potentially toxic materials that affect your liver enzymes, affect your ability to function when you're already dealing with an unbelievable burden of addiction. And so, I felt that I had to do this. I was compelled to be involved in this effort.
What does it say about people that are willing to look the other way? It's like, as long as it's poisoning those people, it's okay?
Yeah.
I don't get that.
I know. I'm going to have to go back to I don't have anything nice. If I don't have anything good to say, I'll just say that for a lot of people, it's a lack of understanding. Right. There's a lack of awareness. And there is, in a lot of cases, people, like you said, looking the other way. Just ignore it, hope it goes away, whatever. But I think of Aldo Leopold, who's one of my favorite authors, wrote a book called Sand County Almanac. To me, one of the most important environmental books ever written. And it's a very simple book it's not even about ecology, it's about the natural world. Mm-hmm. But in there, he talks about having an ecological awareness and training. And the burden that places that on you, once you have that awakening, once you have that awareness, you can't look the other way.
Right.
Because no matter what you do, if you have an ecological awareness, you look at the community and you see the signs of death. You see the signs of sickness because we're not living in harmony with the earth.
Right.
And that leaves a mark on the environment. So I think that for a lot of people, they don't have that kind of awareness. And I was trained. I had many certifications in public health and environmental science. And that's a type of training that changes your awareness. Mm-hmm. And, some people may say, oh, well, you're just woke, or you're just, making all that stuff up. And they'd rather be in denial.
Right.
But
we see a lot of that.
We do see that. But for people that have that level of training and awareness, you can't avoid looking at something
right.
and seeing the telltale signs of, ill health
right.
and disease, however you define that, and then wanting to work toward making that better
right.
or avoiding further harm. And so in this case with Lunt, what we're really about is making sure that we're following the law and we're doing it in a very public, transparent manner, mm-hmm. and that all of the people that need to be involved are involved.
How does it get paid for?
That's it. That's the biggest question. And right now, we're on the cusp of the Healy administration introducing what's called an environmental bond bill. And that is typically for billions of dollars right. in funding for environmental things. Mm-hmm. And what that turns out to be is a way for our local elected officials, our state reps and senators, to bring back money to their districts, mm-hmm. to their constituents. And so what we hope is that we'll have an estimate for how much it will cost to clean the site up, or at least to get well into that process, mm-hmm. and then get an allocation put into the environmental bond bill to fund that. That's our next target.
In the meantime, though, these buildings and offices, they have certificates of occupancy.
They do. They do. My opinion, they should not have been given those right. certificates. It was either done through oversight or through some kind of manipulation of the process. Mm-hmm. That's my belief. Can I prove that? No, I wasn't involved in issuing those certificates, so I can't prove that. My understanding was when the Martin mayoral administration left, there was a shredding party. I was told that by several people that they shredded documents for days. So maybe those documents were shredded. And I was told that by the previous mayor, mm-hmm. not the current mayor.
Right.
So, those records disappeared. Now, we have filed a lot of public records requests. I've filed right. probably dozens of them, and I do have some documentation. But I think what we need to really do is and a lot of people say, well, you have to deal with the past, which is true, and we are dealing with the past because the contamination happened in the past. But we have to actually have a plan for moving forward mm-hmm. and how to deal with that. And so our plan at this point is to try to get that kind of funding through this once every 5-year opportunity for the environmental bond bill.
Right.
And again, there's billions of dollars. It depends on your view of government. I worked for government for my entire career, almost. And I believe that government serves a function, a very important function. It's what provides the glue that holds our society together.
Right.
That's what I believe. I'm not an anarchist. I may be considered radical, perhaps by some, but I do believe that there's a function that needs to be performed by the government, And that's one thing, important thing that we can do is to use the resources that the government can supply to help the local community deal with this. Because the worst case scenario is that that treatment facility shuts down or moves to a different location. And that would be a huge impact on our local needs that we have right here in Greenfield. And we have the need for that kind of facility in this region.
Well, Glenn, we've already run out of time. This is such a fascinating topic, and I was actually thinking about the Bindex property because that did get cleaned up, right? And that, but we don't have time to even go there. So thank you for coming on the program.
I really appreciate it.
We're here, by the way, so you don't have to just wait to come on Local Bias. Though I'm happy to interview you because you're a font of information. But we're here, and so if you wanted to do any other types of presentations, roundtables, discussions, interviews, you know how to do an interview show.
Great. Let me just pay you a compliment and say that I enjoy watching your show very much.
Oh, thank you.
And I think you've done a great job of covering the Northfield Mountain Pump Storage issue that's ongoing right now.
Right.
And I really appreciate the way that you bring that kind of local thing to the public.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you. You've been watching Local Bias. My guest has been Glen Ayers, and thanks for joining us. Take care.